Good afternoon, Sifters. It is the week of December 15th, 2025. I'm Tyler Sherven with my co-host CJ Gettelfinger, and welcome to today's installment of the Weekly
Tyler, did
Sift
you happen to
Stack.
see Time Magazine? They dropped their Person of the Year cover last week. I thought it was pretty spot on. I know that we'll get to cover that a little bit, but there was a few names that were actually kind of left out of that. I was kind of surprised to see.
I was shocked, because I mean, they had a nice cover. It's looks like they're straight up in New York City. They kind of took out
Yeah,
I think it was like from the 30s, right, with those steel workers, those construction workers right up on the beam, and they threw them all on there. It was absolutely gorgeous design. But yeah, I was a little bit surprised that there were a few folks out of that. But at the same time, very surprised that they
yeah,
included
for
so many
sure. I know
people
they've
on
done
it.
that a few times, but we'll leave that for a little bit later in the show. Tyler, how about you go ahead and kick us off with how the markets were doing last week?
So now jumping into the index tracker year to date as of just this last Friday, December 12th, 2025, market close. We're seeing the S&P 500, of course, still up 17.51% year to date with dividends reinvested. Now that is a slight drawdown from last week, and that's due to a 2% decrease in the information technology sector. Now, looking at the Russell 2000 with dividends reinvested, that is one that we haven't really touched too much on, but that is up 15.85% year to date. And that actually had seen an increase of more than 1% over the past week as investors have rotated more toward the small cap stocks. And we also saw growth in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, more of those traditional blue chip stocks. So kind of moving more away from the large Mag 7 tech companies, more into small cap, more into traditional blue chips. Now, as well, we saw the Bloomberg U.S. Aggregate Bond Index dip a little bit. Yields went up throughout the week as there were declining expectations of rate cuts by the Fed going into next year. So we're seeing the Bloomberg U.S. Aggregate Bond Index up 6.73%
Yeah,
year to
Tyler, I
date.
think two things to really key in on that. First, looking at the Russell 2000, the small caps have performed very, very well, and that was just reiterated last week as we saw that rate cut. I know we were talking about SoFi a little bit being one of those smaller companies, how debt really plays a big part into their growth, and so seeing those rates come down has really helped out that Russell. And then exactly what you just said with the S&P and the Nasdaq, we saw some of that sector rotation. So we started to see some more gains taken from some tech and actually, if you look at it year to date, as we close out 2025, really there's been some great growth in the bank sector. I mean, JP Morgan's at all-time highs, Wells Fargo's at all-time highs. I mean, a couple of companies that have just slowly and steadily got you some 30% returns real quietly in the background this year.
Does Jamie Dimon just got some sauce or
He
what's
might, he
going
must
on?
know, he must know exactly what to be doing. Well, switching gears, last week we talked about SoFi. We couldn't stay away for too long. After taking a week off from some of the big AI names and some of those chip companies, we're right back where we left off. This week, we're going to be talking about the second largest foreign company based on market share alone, that being Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSM for short. So, as always, Tyler, let's give our listeners a little bit of a background about TSM, what it is they do, and how they actually make some of the revenues for those who are not aware of this company. TSM is the world's leading chip maker. Think of it like this. If you are making a computer on assembly line, TSM is essentially responsible for manufacturing the brain of the computer. However, they're not going to be the ones doing the final designing. So what they do is they really just make the components to a CPU, a central processing unit, otherwise known as a chip. And what they do is they sell those chips. So they don't do the coding or the designing to the chips. They just make the hardware and then they sell it. So they sell it to their main clientele. And Tyler, do you know what some of those main clientele for those chips are?
I'm gonna have to take a guess at the NVIDIA, AMD, Apple, Google.
You're
Am I
pretty
am I
close, but
reading
you're
some of them
also
in there?
forgetting about Chipotle, Lay's, Doritos, Fritos.
Ooh.
No, I'm just kidding. You hit it right on the spot. It
Oh.
is the names that you're very familiar with. We've got Apple, NVIDIA, AMD, Qualcomm, Broadcom, Intel, Amazon, Google, Tesla, you name it. Anyone that needs chips is going to Taiwan Semi. And so they've got some pretty big names in there. But another thing to really just focus on with this company is that chips are at high demand, right? All time high in demands. Those chips are practically in everything. They're in all modern electronic devices from phones, smartphones, computers. Now we're really seeing big pushes in TVs, even your cars, and now, right, like medical devices, home appliances, vacuums, iRobot. I think we're going to talk on that in a little bit, Tyler, just a little hint there. But, right,
Oh
chips,
yeah,
not the movie.
not the movie.
Chips are basically an essential part of life now. The only thing I'm wondering, though, Tyler, is if TSM is making all these chips, when are they going to start bringing out the queso and guac?
Yeah, I want to know, man, because I mean, I've had
Yeah,
I've had regular chips with guac and queso, but I never tried these new AI chips with the guac and
I think they're
queso.
really
I
missing
mean,
out on a good
might be
revenue
time to
grower
mix it
there.
up.
But the reason we wanted
Oh
to
yeah.
talk about TSM this week is because the market's really going to be looking on heavily to continue to signify how the AI boom is doing and how the chip demand is holding up. So, a few things looking at some of the fundamentals on Taiwan Semi is they have had a phenomenal year this year, and they've really had some good revenue growth since 2023. So, in 2023, their year revenue was about 70.5 billion. In 2024, that revenue was 88.3 billion. So about a 20% increase from 23 to 24. Estimates are coming in to close out the year of 2025 for that to be upwards of 114 billion for 2025. So almost a 30% increase. So a very massive company that's having 20-30% revenue increases. So definitely something's going right there. But one thing to kind of keep your eye on is going to be the relationship that they have with OpenAI. So if you were keeping up with the market last week, the market made some pretty big moves, and it was actually some negative moves from relationships with OpenAI. So Oracle dropped about 15% last week after it came more into the light what Lucas was talking about a few weeks ago about OpenAI being
Mhm.
responsible for a lot of those accounts receivable. And then Broadcom also had earnings last week, and shares fell pretty steeply as well when the name OpenAI was kind of thrown in there as well about being one of their big partners, one of their big clients going into the future for some forecasted revenue. So the market's definitely starting to take into consideration how they are viewing OpenAI. They're taking it with a little bit more
Mhm.
skepticism because, right, there's skepticism around Sam Altman, but there's also just skepticism around how is OpenAI going to be able to pay for all these forecasted orders. So there's no real clear exact dollar amount or clear exact ties that OpenAI and Taiwan Semiconductor have at the moment. Now it's confirmed they do have some ties, some connection, but it's a little bit foggy. So I would definitely keep your eyes peeled to see what news comes out and if there's any connection with OpenAI, and we'll just have to see how the market and how that stock responds if there is any news there.
Now, CJ, what I want to know is like with OpenAI in particular, what is their profitability? And
Yeah,
actually, I'd be curious, like, what is your overall
it's
perspective
very
on
interesting. It
OpenAI
is. So
as a company?
ChatGPT is obviously the forefronter of AI. I think we can agree on that when you think of it. But on
Hmm.
a fundamental basis, they're talking about potentially going public upwards of $1 trillion IPO come 2026. So about 13
Okay.
billion in revenue with potentials of $1 trillion IPO. And that just kind of begs to continue what we've been seeing in the market when you start to see some of these forward-looking revenue projections connected to OpenAI. Well, how can a company make a promise to purchase 100 billion in chips when they only made 13 billion last year? So that's kind of where you're starting to see a lot of that
Mhm.
skepticism come into play. I know that they even were asking for the government to start backing some of their debt obligations, things of that nature. Definitely a little bit of a red flag there, but it's hard to say. I think ChatGPT is probably going to be essential in the play for AI. We'll just have to see it play out a little bit more, and for them to just kind of solidify themselves a little bit more, really start to see some of that revenue come in before they should be making some more of these deals like they are, just throwing out billions and billions in forecasted revenue without the money to back it. So to finish things up with TSM, this year has been a great year for foreign holdings. If you're looking at maybe any of your target date funds or anything like that in your 401k and you're saying, hey, I've got a large exposure to some international funds, well, TSM has definitely helped propel some good return for you there. A mix of weakening to the US dollar, but also great investment into TSM just for the high demand and the need for those chips. So
Mhm.
TSM's really been a huge contributor to a lot of that international growth that we've seen over the past 2 years. Just to close though, two things I want to kind of keep in the mind of people is keep in mind with TSM, it is a foreign company, right? It is in Taiwan. So there could be potential tensions between China and the US, and especially when it comes to those chips and AI for that growth and who's going to really be able to push it and really lead the way. Hence why we saw back a few months ago, right, the US made a large investment into Intel. They bought a 10% stake there because Intel
Mm.
is our domestic chip producer. And so you could see that over the next few years, the US really tries to kind of take a stand there with TSM and tries to get more of that domestic chip growth. But I think it's pretty safe to say that TSM is not necessarily going anywhere and that the chip demand is not going to be slowing down anytime soon.
Well, the ChatGPT, the OpenAI, they made their cut into Time Magazine's Person of the Year. So, Time Magazine released their Person of the Year cover, and it is exactly what you thought it would be. Just maybe not a bunch of different people. It is the architects of AI. So, the cover image isn't just a single person, it is all of the big names in the AI space. So, we got leaders like Jensen Huang, Lisa Su, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Sam Altman, and others were recognized for rapidly pushing AI from idea to infrastructure and execution. So Time's message is clear. The AI era has shifted from cautious debate to full speed deployment. No tapping the brakes, just pure gas. AI is now embedded everywhere, reshaping daily life faster than the internet or mobile revolutions, while raising big questions around responsibility, energy use, and jobs. So, hey, I mean, we're not really too sure about OpenAI's future or how ChatGPT is going to 100% maneuver in the long term.
I think that they nailed that though. I was listening to a little bit of back and forth about the cover, and I think this is like the second or third time that they've actually done a group this year, and I think that they nailed that. I would have to say, you could say, oh, maybe it was Sam or maybe it was Elon or
Mm-hmm.
Jensen Huang, but I do think that there is going to be a play to this 5, 10 years down the road where you really see that everybody kind of had their hands into it, making the AI boom really kind of play out.
All right, jumping into AI companies to know from that Time edition here for 2025 Person of the Year. I am curious to ask you, CJ, which Mag 7 company do you think is not on the
There's no,
list?
I'm gonna say, I'm gonna, I'm, I'm gonna go with Amazon. I don't,
Amazon is on the list. Now, the big name that is off the list is Apple, right? Apple's been huge, been reigning number one for a very long time. And that was kind of the biggest shock for me to not see it
yeah,
on the list. Amazon made it onto the top computing providers. So basically, companies that assemble chips and other components into data centers, which other companies rent to run the AI systems. And then also, TSMC made the list for the chip builders. So the companies that make the specialized computer chips that model builders use to run their AI systems. So TSMC made the list along with, of course, AMD and NVIDIA there. So very interesting, along as OpenAI on the model builders, so
yeah,
the ones that are actually training the languages that we use, the AI models that we use that are going to be making more chatbots and agents involved in the company. So they made the list along with Meta. Next up, Roomba runs out of power. iRobot files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So now don't mistake this for the iRobot movie with Will Smith. Don't worry, nobody's coming to smack your face. iRobot, the maker of Roomba, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. So, what is Chapter 11 bankruptcy? Chapter 11 actually allows companies to continue to function under court supervision as it reorganizes its debt. So after years of mounting losses, falling sales, and rising stocks, the collapse was accelerated by tariffs, which in turn sharply increased the expenses of their products that were made overseas in Vietnam, while at the same time, sales in the US had plunged. So, 2 years previously, actually, Amazon had attempted to acquire the company, but that was disapproved by the regulators. And with cash dwindling and debt piling up, shareholders are expected to be wiped out. iRobot plans to continue operating during restructuring and expects to be acquired by its primary manufacturer, marking a dramatic fall for a once dominant consumer robotics brand. Now, I actually am a huge fan of the Roomba. I have, I think, a knockoff of it. It does a great job, saves me a ton of time.
I think that they've just been absolutely, completely wiped out because of the knockoffs. I love a Roomba too. I mean, it's as convenient as it gets. Set that thing for night mode and it's just working through the night. But they've just had to have been
Yeah,
hammered by knockoffs. Kira and I, we have two of them actually, and I don't think either of them's an actual Roomba.
it seems like it's very easy
Yeah,
to replicate, and I just think the competition just was
agreed.
overwhelming, and there's
Probably
just
using those
always going to
TSM
be
chips as
somebody
well.
that's going to figure out a cheaper option. Yeah, it all comes into play with all those. So next up, we got a Fed watch, the battle of the two Kevins. So former Fed Governor Kevin Warsh has emerged as a top contender to succeed Jerome Powell as Federal Reserve Chair. Trump told the Wall Street Journal that Warsh and National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett are the leading candidates, calling them the two Kevins. Trump also reiterates his view that the Fed chair should consult the president on interest rate decisions, saying his perspective should be considered and upfront. So, taking a look at Polymarket and Kalshi, Kevin Warsh is the favorite right now. So, he's leading the way, 46% odds on Polymarket and at 51% on Kalshi. So, he is the favorite. We'll see how it plays out. And right now, we got the odds of the Fed keeping interest rates the same, leading the way for the next Federal Open Market Committee on January 28th at 76%, according to the CME FedWatch. Well, CJ, you got any bets on what's coming up with the Fed
Like
here?
that to stay around that 76 range. I like that. If I were gonna bet on it, I would say we're gonna probably likely hold the line and stay where we're at for now.
I'm kind of surprised because I remember some weeks ago, I'm pretty sure that Hassett was leading the way, and Warsh, just like a racehorse out of nowhere, is
Yeah,
is crawled up as
coming
the
down the back
favorite now.
stretch.
So we'll see how the sentiment reads out right on that final stretch. Well, hey CJ, next the big thing on our list here is the poll question. So going back to Time Magazine's 25 Architects of AI Person of the Year, we want to know from you folks, who do you think is the most likely from that list, from those folks sitting on the steel beam there, who is most likely to dominate the AI landscape a decade from now? First up, we got Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla. Of course, I don't think he needs any introduction there. Next up, we got Mark Zuckerberg. And then third, Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA. And then Lisa Su, CEO of Advanced Micro Devices. CJ, any thoughts on that? Which horse what do you think is going to lead
Yeah,
that
that's a good one. I like
10-year
this
race
question
down
a
the
lot.
road?
I'm gonna stick with NVIDIA. I'm gonna say that NVIDIA maybe finds their footing, and I think NVIDIA can keep climbing out of this. So I'm gonna go with Jensen Huang here.
I'm leaning that way too, honestly. Jensen Huang, shoot, he just has a way
He
of
does.
electrifying a room, electrifying a company. He brought that company back up from like the depths of just doing chips for
Yep.
video games and such. So I'm leaning that way too. Now, last week's poll results. Does Netflix's potential acquisition of Warner Brothers bode well for the stock price? So thank you all for responding to this on Instagram or the newsletter. So leading the way was 82%. Yes, I am feeling positive about the company's prospects with that potential acquisition of Warner Brothers. It's kind of difficult to see how, you know, any sort of potential movement with Warner Brothers
Hmm.
wouldn't have a positive impact with Netflix, as they're just going to have more access to the entire entertainment space, also more access to remove access from the movie theaters. CJ, I know you're a
Yep.
big movie theater fan, actually, including myself. It's kind of sad to see my local movie theater. It's like
Yep.
cut in half at this point. I like seeing those old neon lights and such, but that was the takeaway from the followers.
In the short term, I think we've seen Netflix definitely take a hit from it so far. We'll have to continue to see how it plays out. I don't think this is going to be anything resolved in the short term. definitely going to be something you're
No.
looking at 12, 18, maybe even 24 months down the road. We'll just see how far that this gets pushed out. To finish this off, as always, Tyler, want to look at our motivational quote for the week from none other than CEO CC Wei of Taiwan Semiconductor. Without strategy, execution is aimless. Without execution, strategy is useless.
I'll tap in with this one. I think with it, CJ, here's the thing. I think you're incredible at the execution. Like I think what this one is going to say is like basically without the strategy, execution is worthless, right? So without strategy, without thought on what you're doing, just plugging away, you're not really having any sort of keen sense of direction, and you might just be spinning your wheels, wasting your
Yeah.
energy in one spot, right? So, but at the same time, without execution, strategy is useless. Essentially meaning like, right, you're just spending too much time
Yep.
overthinking on things. There's a point of diminishing returns on just overthinking, over strategizing, and you're better at just getting going, executing, getting some data on your actual results and get moving.
It's a little bit of
Yeah.
both, right? A little bit of mix between the strategy and the execution is going to get you where you want to be. Well, thanks as always, everyone, for listening on this week's episode of the Weekly Sift Stack. Let us know your feedback. We always love to hear from you, and we look forward to catching you all on the next one.
This material is for educational purposes only and is not intended to provide specific investment advice or recommendations. Investing involves risk, including loss of principal.